This is Beyond the Door, exploring the light of Freemasonry. Hello and welcome back to Beyond the Door, exploring the light of Freemasonry. I am Chris Crume, and again joined by my co-host Matt Salyer, and I'd also like to introduce Trey Bond, our producer, who's going to be doing a lot of work behind the scenes, and you'll actually get to hear him in front of the microphone in a couple episodes when we talk about the mysticism and the symbolism behind Freemasonry. But man, can you believe, Matt, that we are where we are right now?
I mean, this was such a labor of love, and there were so many months getting it off the ground that to be sitting here and needing to kind of bring in some extra hands to make it happen is kind of surreal. Just really looking forward to not only this one, of course, but actually the one with Trey is what I'm looking forward to the most. There's just so much there that we can kind of dig into and start speculating, right?
Yeah, I mean, boy, that might have to be our first two-part discussion as much as there is to discuss there. But, today I'm really excited to talk about really the ancient origins and how we got from operative masonry, or from speculative masonry to operative masonry. I got that backwards. Operative masonry to speculative masonry, and just really dive into that and kind of guide people from where we kind of think it started to where we know it really started, in 1717 in London.
It's one of those eternal questions, right? Did we just borrow really heavily from things that preceded us, or is there some type of connective tissue that reaches back, into earlier times? It's certainly, for me at least, it's always fun to go into these things and see what connections you can make, and somewhat surprising what's there. But given how history can be lost and what reputable sources are available, I don't know that we're ever going to know if it's real or if it's just borrowed information.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we're going to connect some of the dotted lines and maybe not like that full straight line to, current speculative masonry, but some dotted lines from some of the operative stuff here into speculative masonry.
Boy, people really have made an effort to make that a solid line, though. I mean, the reading that you and I did to get into this is, that's going to be recommended reading.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the other thing that I'm really looking forward to on this episode as well is our interview with Right Worshipful Brother King. That was fantastic. And I think everyone that's listening is really going to enjoy that as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Great guest, great guy. Tune in for that for sure. All right, before we get into this bigger discussion here, as always, we'll give you a look ahead at what the Masonic calendar looks like in the month of December. So Tuesday, December the 2nd at 7:30 p.m., Newark number 97 is going to have its stated meeting. Saturday, December the 13th, and Saturday, December the 27th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., the Licking County Historical Society passport tours will again take place at the Newark Masonic Temple. As we say every episode, come on down and check that out and have some conversations with the brethren.
Dress warmly. It might be a little chilly in those months.
Also Saturday, December the 13th at around 12 p.m., the Army-Navy game will be taking place at Aerospace number 800. There will be a concert in the building before the game.
Yeah, I believe it's the son of one of the brothers over at Aerospace, if I'm not mistaken. I cannot remember the name of the band, but they're going to be playing before the Army-Navy game, kind of giving it a little bit more ambiance.
Do we know a genre?
I cannot remember for the life of me. I'm the worst person to be advertising this right now, but I do know that there's going to be a concert, and it should be a good time.
Is it polka rap?
It is not polka rap. I was hoping for polka rap, but Weird Al was unavailable.
Very, very niche.
Very niche.
All right, and finally, Monday, December 15th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., the 19th District Leadership Course, Phase 3, will take place at West Lafayette, number 602.
And with this episode dropping before the holidays, I think, it's that time to start thinking about Thanksgiving, about Christmas, Hanukkah, all the different holidays out there. And we just really want to wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving. Hopefully you get to spend time with your friends, your family, and those closest to you.
Yes. I would second that and also tell you to enjoy some football.
All right, so let's just jump into this discussion about history and masonry and where this kind of starts. I mean, where do we really begin? I guess that's the biggest question.
So, officially, everybody is familiar with the Grand Lodge of England being formed with Goose and Gridiron in 1717, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
But
that's
so we talked about bright lines and dotted lines, or solid lines and dotted lines, apologies. That history is a solid line, right? From 1717 forward, we've got a pretty good grasp on what it is that's taken place.
yeah, absolutely. We can trace everything that we're currently doing back to that Grand Lodge of 1717 in London.
And a little further beyond, right? Because these independent lodges had to exist for a long enough period that it became necessary for a Grand Lodge to form and for the practices of Masonry to start to seek uniformity under that Grand Lodge.
Yeah, it's 1717 is where it was really codified first.
Correct. But if we're going to reach even further back in history, it does start to get speculative, right? And for the listeners, this is borrowed very heavily from a book entitled The Ancient Manuscripts of the Freemasons, The Transformation from Operative to Speculative Masonry. It's by Michael R. Poll, Poll. And both Chris and I read this probably more than once in order to try and get an idea of what it is that we're about to talk about here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've not read this book, I really recommend just taking a dive into it. It to me, it was very interesting to see how the author was using these ancient manuscripts that we know exist because they're out there, and connecting the dots back to 1717 and then beyond. It really struck a chord at just how timeless masonry really is.
Yes. And in terms of like artifacts, historical artifacts that we can really point to and again start to draw that dotted line, it starts around 1390 with a document called the Regius Manuscript. And if to the extent that I might have butchered that, it is Regius. And the book goes into details on how this document was dated. And on the low end, it's still late 1300s. On the high end, they're looking at 1420s. It's rather settled that it's within the last decade of the 14th century.
Yeah. And what I found interesting about this manuscript, I think the most is, it was actually written as an 800 line poem, right? And
Interesting is maybe not the word I would have chosen.
well, it's interesting to me that it was written in that prose like that. And there's a lot of speculation that it was written by a Roman Catholic as well. Just knowing, Catholicism's history with Masonry and, how closely it was tied then, but not as closely, maybe in the modern times.
I'm not overly surprised though, because if you look at where the church was in terms of society and culture, it really was the focal point at this time, right? Religion and church was where people met. There were values that they adhered to from a societal standpoint, right? And even today, if you look at the cardinal virtues of the Catholic Church, they directly mirror that of the Masonic virtues.
They really do. And, I don't know exactly where it all went wrong, but, we'd love to see a little bit more of that collaboration and cooperation, I think. My dad was a former Catholic. He's a Baptist now, but, that was one of the reasons he didn't come to Masonry until much later in his life.
I will not bash any religion, right? And like, I don't want to come from that perspective at all. I do find it very odd that with so much overlap in terms of values, with so much overlap in terms of, I want like acceptable behaviors, if you will,
Moral virtues.
right? With both of these organizations, Masonry, the Catholic Church, operating under such similar moral codes, it surprises me that modern day there isn't more cooperation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I said, it's one of those that what we have is exactly what they're already espousing. It'd be nice to kind of marry those two together. But, as I looked through too, I think one of the very interesting pieces that I looked at as they tried to, you know, connect those dotted lines to where we're at now. The Comesines. I think that's kind of where it all really started, is with the Comesines, that ancient Roman guild dedicated to architecture.
Yes, and that is another topic that is kind of they go into great depth in this book about what potential interaction there may be between Masonry and the Comesines. And at least from an operative perspective, there does seem to be quite a bit in terms of what it is, the known works of the Comesines, the documents around the Comesine masters, and I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the word I'm looking for. Help me out here.
Uh, I know what you mean. Everything about them leads us to believe that they started the kind of that moral code. And this is where I think it's interesting too. And I've always said this. You and I have had this discussion. You look at what we have from the Comesines. You look at what we have from like the Regis manuscript, from all these different manuscripts that are out there, and it's almost like it's the world's oldest employee handbook, right? You're teaching these craftsmen who, may not have had an education, they may not have grown up in the royal courts, how to interact with, the lords and ladies of the manors that they were making these great works for, right? So they needed a document and they needed something to teach them how to, how to work that and how to work that relationship. And that's when I look at those ancient charts, when I look at what we got from the Comesines and, the Regis manuscript and, and beyond, it's almost like an employee handbook.
Yeah, any employee code of conduct, right? Now, it might not be in line with the company today because, for instance, it asked for reverence for God and the church, not a church, but the church. Again, returning to Roman Catholics.
Yeah.
Loyalty to king and the law. I mean, a parallel today is, of course, probably going to be not to foment chaos and to not use company resources to violate law, but to your code of conduct, employee handbook kind of situation. Yeah, there's some parallels.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's teaching these craftsmen, saying, when this duke or this duchess is coming to the the job site, or you're interacting with them at a banquet or something like that. Do this, don't do that. Act this way, don't act this way. Or when your supervisor is giving you directions or teaching you how to do something, here's how you're supposed to act and interact with that person.
Yes. And on top of that, I mean, some of the stuff in it is overtly Masonic. Now, again, whether or not this is borrowed heavily later in time or not, I cannot say. But, one of these charges that they are given is obedience to the master and the fellowship. And this goes back to our earlier conversation about the various degrees, right? The master is not meant in a 21st century way. It's speaking about apprenticeship.
Yeah. I mean, the master craftsman is somebody who has, they started as the apprentice, they became the fellow craft, they became the master of that craft where they've learned everything that they possibly could, and now they're the ones that are overseeing the work and then teaching that new group as they come up.
Yes. No, very well said. And, again, looking at those Masonic parallels, where it just what you're talking about, whether or not it's with lords and ladies or with, brethren within the craft, it talks about proper conduct and manners, talks about emotional control, anger, refrain from quarreling. This sounds very similar to what we do within Masonry and what we kind of preach from the figurative pulpit, right? When we talk about subduing our passions. Nothing good comes of letting your emotions get out of control. If your emotions get in the way of sound thought and reason, rash decisions ensue, and generally nothing good comes of that. So this proper conduct and manners, it allowed them not only to get additional business, but it kept the guild in check, right? From a reputational standpoint, nobody was losing anything.
Yeah, everybody was still making money. You were allowed to learn, make your money. And again, I look at it like a lot of our modern day unions. There's a lot of, I think, parallel in those modern day unions when you look at, you know, what they're teaching in the apprenticeship programs, getting into your journeyman, and then moving on and beyond that. So there's a lot of parallels there too, and it's parallels with the ancient charges, it's parallels with what we do now, and then parallels with those unions.
Yes, and this came about a lot with not only this manuscript, but you mentioned the ancient charges, right? And we're not there yet. There's still more to discuss here, but you're right. We're looking at a document from 1390, and as we move forward in time, we're gonna sound like broken records, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
What happened is the Comesines found something that worked, and it passed down from that point through the ages.
Yeah, they found something that worked, and then everybody started to adopt that, whether it was in England, Germany, France. I found it very interesting, and I know I'm gonna butcher this. As they went forward, the founding of England as a country with the Anglo-Saxons, Athelstan. I'm pretty sure I got that right, but tying the mythology of Athelstan into Freemasonry and him being a patron of Freemasonry, then you see that with him. You see that with Charles Martel in France, and kind of how those became the proto, grand masters of the early lodges of both operative and speculative.
Well, it stands to reason the Roman Empire extended into Great Britain quite a bit and was there for a considerable amount of time. So it stands to reason these things were present, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting how these countries, these countries in these manuscripts have tied that those ancient kings, where we don't know necessarily was Charles Martel a Mason. We don't know that, but how they can kind of tie that into those documents and saying, "Oh yeah, Charles Martel, yeah, we can trace it back to that." I love that because it shows that it was still on the minds, and we were looking at that from a leadership standpoint in our in the forming of countries.
Right now, all my mind is doing is wondering if a Masonic guild built Hadrian's Wall.
I mean, who knows? That there's probably there is probably some artifacts out there that could point towards that.
I don't recall that being one of the Comesine known works in my research, but it would be an interesting bit of info if it was.
I mean, it may not have been the Comesines, but it could have been a group that was maybe trained by the Comesines, or a splinter group from the Comesines that, as the Roman Empire fell, obviously that's when we fell into the Dark Ages. And, history gets a little bit jumbly during the Dark Ages. There's a lot of myth mixed in with historical fact, which I think is kind of unique too.
No argument here.
But yeah, I look at this, we barely scratched the surface with the Comesines, I feel like, but, we get from the Comesines then into these Dark Ages where, we start talking about Charles Martel, Athelstan and things like that. Where's that connection then go from there as you look at it?
Well, the presumption is that the Comesine masters actually survived the Dark Ages. That's where much of this comes from, and that their influence was spread from there, that it was retained. I can't recall the city that they were that they speculatively kind of hold up in.
It was in the north of Italy. Was
correct?
Cuomo or Como, or I believe something
yes,
something like that. If I remember reading it.
It shared the same root as the Comesines, but the full name is escaping me at the moment. But yes, the idea is that they were able to basically hold up there and ride out the turmoil that was the Dark Ages, and then begin to have an influence spread from that region again in later years.
Yeah, absolutely, and you see that popping up, all throughout until we get to 1717 in England with the Grand Lodge forming. One of the things as I was reading through as well that really kind of struck me is a lot of the terminology that we use, whether that is Master of the Lodge or Senior Warden, Junior Warden, things like that. You start to see those terms popping up in these ancient manuscripts where they're talking about the master appointing his wardens, as his kind of proxies, which is exactly what we do. The senior warden is the proxy for the worshipful master if the worshipful master is absent or has to be away. And we start to see that popping up in these documents where, hey, the master's supposed to appoint a warden if the master's called away back to the guild or called away by the lord of the castle or something. The other thing that I think was very interesting in looking at the terminology or some of the things that are part of our beliefs are, they talk about in point 82 of I'm blanking on the document. Do you know the document that I'm talking about?
Are we looking at the Torgau ordinances now?
I believe so. Um, no fellow shall lead a woman of evil report into the lodges or places of labor, neither shall he take her where masons are together. Who so doth shall pay so many pounds of wax. But again, that's obviously something that's meant for operative masonry, but then we look at it as this is still a fraternity, and we don't necessarily bring women into the lodge. Now, we do have ceremonies and stuff where we do allow women and families, and non-masons to come into it, but it's still a men's only fraternity. And I think it's interesting to see that we've kind of see the beginnings of that in some of these old documents, and it carries through.
I often wonder if that is part of the guild itself, or if it's just more of a mark on what the society was at the time.
I would say it's probably a little bit of both.
Same.
I mean, you look at, what kind of labor they were doing, right? And, at that time it was very male dominated. Society was male
still
dominated.
male dominated.
Yeah.
If you're looking at operative masonry today.
It is. And, it was very, it was a male dominated society. So, unfortunately they weren't going to let women come along. And that, I think that's unfortunate as you look at it, but,
we've since remedied this, folks. There are appendant bodies to masonry that are specifically for women.
There are, like the Eastern Star, and I think that's one of the really great things about masonry is that we have evolved with the times, and we do have these opportunities out there as well. The other thing that I noticed from this manuscript, and it's just a couple points down, is this was the first time that I noticed them mentioning St. John's Day, and how both the Saints John have significance to Freemasonry, but this is really one of the first times where they talk about celebrating and holding in reverence St. John's Day.
And I believe the Saints John that's an American lodge thing.
It is, but you find it from these ancient manuscripts, which I found very.
No, I'm just connecting the dots as you say it, right? And I'm wondering, I'm seeing this march forward in time and then cross oceans.
It is, and I think that's what's really unique is that these tenets get carried over, whether it's to the American lodges or different lodges out there. It's just one of those things. It's interesting. I 110 on this document as well really interested me is where and every fellow shall pray the other fellows, and they shall not turn a deaf ear. They shall all help me that God may help ye. And when they have helped him, he shall doff his hat and say, God thank the master and warden and worthy fellows. To me, that really evokes, the brotherly love, relief, and truth that we talk about today in speculative masonry. And we're seeing that in these ancient manuscripts right there. We're seeing that, I guess, codified, help each other out.
Yes, it's any good society is going to do these things, right? And I think that having this insular guild, if you will, step in and kind of clearly identify who it is that you're responsible for, right? Because if there's no limiting principle to these things, you're not really capable of helping. But if you're doing it in a way where you're identifying your in-group, if you will, which is not necessarily the best thing to do from a societal standpoint, but working in group, you've got a limiting principle there. And that limiting principle means that you're not going to be responsible for everybody, but you can do your part here, and they're going to do the same thing for you. And that little group is going to thrive under those circumstances because nobody's going to get left behind.
Yeah. And I think that's been one of those things that has been really important for me in masonry. Is, we all are on the level. We're all on the same page. We're all helping each other out. I love that, and that really kind of evokes that for me. One of the things I did want to go maybe just a little bit back and talk about as well. We've talked about operative masonry and speculative masonry. What's the difference?
Or are you asking me?
I'm asking you. What's
Okay.
the difference?
Okay, so that's actually a fairly simple answer. Operative masonry is going out and doing the actual labor associated with masonry. We're talking about quarrying stone, we're talking about shaping stone, talking about laying stone. This is the geometry of the arch. This is the great cathedrals. These are people who risked life and limb and tested boundaries when it relates to angles and weights to construct some of the wonderful works that you see across Europe, right? That's operative masonry. And those are actual hard mathematical lessons that you can learn. The speculative portion is taking those things from operative masonry and putting them in a more philosophical framework. What did these things teach us? What is important about being level? What is important about a solid foundation, etc.?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is you can kind of start to see that change from operative to speculative when you look at some of these manuscripts and they talk about the lords and of the manor or the castle that they were building, seeing what was going on. They're like, hey, that's kind of a cool lesson. I kind of want to be a part of that. Or they're just arrogant enough to say, well, I want to be one of these and I don't want to have to do the work. But you see how it started to transition in those manuscripts when they say, oh, well, yeah, the Lord can be, a master, but not work.
Yeah, it stopped being so much about the labor, and entry could kind of could be, I don't want to say bought, but almost bought.
Yeah.
Whether or not it was with actual finances or with reputation and influence, these higher status individuals were essentially invited into the guilds, and while they weren't doing the labor and risking life and limb and getting the calluses on the hands, they were looking at what was occurring and kind of framing it in a moral code manner.
Yeah. And that's where that starts to twist and turn then into the speculative masonry and how we get to 1717. And then, obviously it's carried across the oceans with, settlers in the New World. And that's really how we get to American masonry, which is about 250 years old. So, as we look at, kind of the operative side, the speculative side of Freemasonry, we know that because of, the history being a little bit more convoluted around Masonry, there have been a lot of myths about Freemasonry that have popped up over the centuries. Is there one that really comes to mind for you when you think about the myths around Freemasonry?
I can name several, but the one that I find the most interesting, if not intriguing, is the Illuminati connection.
Expound.
It's very difficult because the Illuminati, I can't recall the exact period of time that they were an actual thing, but their influence was not that great. We're talking about a very, very small sect that was only around for a handful of years and did not gain a considerable amount of influence. But there was enough noise around them and there was enough speculation around them that when they eventually disappeared, if they disappeared for my conspiracy-minded listeners, when they disappeared, people just assumed that they went quote unquote underground and that they were merging with other bodies and influencing other societies, and they're this shadow hand that's happening, behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Now, that is not what intrigues me about it, right? You look at the name of this podcast. We're exploring the light of Freemasonry, and it does not take a genius to make a connection with Illuminati, right? The root of that word, the etymology of that word is light. So that right there is what it's the hook, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that it's truly set in me, but I am curious just because of that connection.
Yeah. No, I think that's it's an interesting connection because could you trace some roots back? Probably. Again, it's connecting those dotted lines, like like we're connecting from the Comacenes all the way up to 1717, right? We're dotted lining that. So could you dotted line it there?
Well, within Masonry itself, there have been some organizations that have been for modern Masonry terms, declared clandestine,
Yeah,
right? And the
absolutely.
Illuminati is amongst them.
It is.
That's not incorrect.
No, that isn't. I think one of my favorite, is that we're humanoid reptiles. Have you ever heard that one before?
Heard it. Watch me take off my skin.
Just like the Visitors. You remember that miniseries back in the day when we were kids
No, I do not.
with the reptiles from another planet? I'll show it to you one of these days. But I love that one because again, we're getting into this total science fiction, and you know me, I'm a science fiction lover, but we're getting to this crazy science fiction belief that we're human lizards that are, putting on this fake skin. I mean, how crazy does that get? I love that. I also love, you know, the Dan Brown stuff, with the Da Vinci Code and all of that. It really kind of, it's a fun read, but is it real? No, not really.
Yeah, Dan Brown borrowed heavily from a book called Holy Blood, Holy Grail for that, which is actually incredibly interesting. There's a lot of dotted lines in there that one could connect if they're so inclined.
It is, but it's also one of those books that's actually been proven patently false as well, where they got their information from.
They make a lot of. I can't speak to the truth or falsity of it, but as an attentive reader, I can tell you that they make some logical leaps in there, and the conclusions that they arrive at are not the only available conclusions.
Yeah, again, I've done a little bit of research with that one and just watched some documentaries, and there's a lot of leaps, and they've really taken some documents I think that were actually some falsely proven documents, and then tried to incorporate those, and it doesn't fit. But I love the conspiracy theory around that and how it pertains to Masonry, and we're hiding all these secrets.
Well, and what you're talking about again, Priory of Sion is an adjacent group.
Yeah, it truly is.
To bring it back around, though, I am incredibly intrigued by all of that with the hidden meaning of some of the paintings.
Yes, absolutely. Some of the paintings, is there that hidden meaning within them? I mean, again, I come back to the paintings that we have hanging upstairs here at Newark 97, and we have the one about the Masonic parable for the Master Mason degree, right? And the hidden meanings within that, we know the hidden meanings, but your average person looking at that doesn't necessarily know the hidden meanings. Now, is that a conspiracy theory? No, but there's that hidden meaning and that symbolism, I think, in the art, and I think that's really, really interesting, and it can espouse some, or it can create some conspiracy theories, if you will.
Yeah, there are many layers to that painting. Right now, the first one is nicotine.
we do need to get those restored. Boy, I feel like we could do an entire episode on just the conspiracy theories around Freemasonry, and boy, maybe we will. Maybe that's a topic for the future. But
Trey right now looks like a bobblehead on a car.
He's ready to discuss all of those conspiracy theories.
Just up and down and up and down and up and down.
I think we're going to have to do one here in the very, very near future, just focusing on the conspiracy theories. And maybe I'll take more of a back seat, and Trey's going to talk for about 2 hours about Masonic conspiracy theories.
That one will be fun. It might not be informative, but it'll be fun.
It'll be really, really fun. But now I'm excited to hop over to our interview with Right Worshipful Brother King. Typically, we put these into 2 parts, but this interview was just so good that we're going to give you the whole thing right now.
Yeah, enjoy this one, brother.
All right, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Right Worshipful Brother Brian King to the Newark 97 podcast studio. Right Worshipful Brother King is a member of Ohio 199 and Thrall 170. He's also currently one of the District Deputy Grand Masters for the 19th Masonic District. Right Worshipful, it is so great to have you here. Thank you for being our guest here on Beyond the Door.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
We've been looking forward to having you in here for a while. So, I mean, honestly, let's just jump right in and start talking about your Masonic journey and maybe some insights into, how Masonry is structured here in Ohio. We keep referring to the 19th district a lot. So, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey, your hobbies, what you like to do outside the lodge.
Yeah. So, in terms of masonry, to my knowledge, um, I don't know of any family members who were masons. I'm sure if you went back far enough, somebody was, or several people were. But yeah, it wasn't until I was, I think, 33 years old, I became a mason. Um, I kind of always, I grew up in a very small town, so I thought that was something that only happened in like bigger cities, Columbus or Cincinnati. You see the movies and you hear stuff about it like, oh, that doesn't happen around here. um, but yeah, I eventually moved to where I live now and eventually found out there was a lodge there, and so that kind of started the Masonic journey. As far as hobbies and stuff, um, well, I work in construction. Hobby wise, really just keeping up with the house and doing things, or at home. Wife usually has stuff to keep me busy and things like that. So do a little bit of word working, things like that. So yeah.
Do you have a favorite band?
Like music, you mean?
Oh, yeah.
Uh, you know, I hate- I don't hate to say it, but I grew up with rock, like rock, heavy metal, things like that.
Okay.
But I listen
I'm
to
good with that.
a little bit of everything. Um, Good music's good music, but yeah,
It's one of those subjective topics, right? But when it comes to rock, you have so many different genres. Is there an era in particular?
probably late '80s, early '90s.
Did you ever
Um,
tease your hair out?
no, no,
So there are
no,
no late
no. I
80s pictures of Brian King.
No, none that I would admit to.
Understood.
Yeah. Wasn't really big into the hairband kind of thing. I kind of it was after that,
Okay.
kind of just after that.
When Metallica
Um,
hit the scene.
there we go. Yeah,
All right.
and of course, grunge became a big thing too. So when I was in school, that was a big thing. But um, yeah, at this point, it's kind of whatever. I listen to whatever.
Uh, I'm in a place in my life where all of the things that I listen to are on the oldie station. So,
So I work with a bunch of young people, and stuff comes on the radio, and well, when we have radio, and they'll make comments like, "Oh, that's a classic," and I'm thinking, "That's not classic. That's."
I was in 10th grade when that came out.
Yeah,
I
I
could
have that
tell
on
you what car
cassette.
I was
Yeah,
driving.
I have that on cassette. That can't be a classic, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of where it's at now for me. Some of the favorite bands there. Oh, QFM 96, and they're doing. Oh dear God, I'm old.
And of course, when you say rock, you look at like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Anybody and everybody's in there. It doesn't, it's not like rock like I think is rock,
Right,
but
there's no distinction in the music genres when it comes to. Yeah, totally understood.
you know,
So what? Switching back to masonry.
yep.
Nobody in the family. What originally piqued your curiosity?
Well, it was that. It was curiosity, honestly. Was one of them. I had just moved into a new town. Bought a house. We moved there. Honestly, felt like there's something I needed to do. Felt like I needed to be a part of something. Um, at the time, I didn't know it was an option, but I happened to move in next door to a Freemason, and it just kind of worked out that way. Um, Ironically, I passed a lodge twice a day for 15 years and never knew it was a lodge. Um, but yeah, which is kind of sad. But I met him, and he was one of those guys that didn't want to talk about it. And maybe he hinted along the way, and I was just too dense to pick up on it. But it wasn't until another Mason was driving to his house to see him and saw me out in the yard and stopped and said something to me. That's what kind of started it all. And like, next day he was walking over with a petition, and
Okay.
um, but yeah, he never really mentioned anything or talked about it too much. And I knew he was one, and that was it. He never really talked about it.
Did you approach him with questions and he was just very closed-lipped, or more of a kind of an introvert recognizes introvert situation?
I kind of thought, he's not really asking or saying anything about it. He must not think I'd be good for it because he's not really trying. It's
Right.
um, the other guy was kind of the opposite. He just he holds his hand up. He's wearing a ring. He just points at it. He goes, "You ever thought about that?" Yeah, I have. What am I supposed to do? And well, there we go. So
To be one, ask one.
that's right. He's like, well, you just did it. You just asked. Well, wish you'd have told me that a year ago.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that's kind of how it. And I didn't realize it, but I got there and I knew people already, but I didn't know they were Masons. When I got to lodge, I'm like, oh, I know you, and I know you, and I know you. Um, but leading into that, I didn't know all those people were members. So yeah, nobody really talked about it too much.
So once you were in your lodge, you'd been initiated, passed, raised. Where did you go from there? How did your journey progress?
So I was fortunate because somebody just kind of grabbed me and led me along, and it wasn't like I gradually got involved. It was like right away. Um, he was very active, very energetic, and he made it clear he wanted me to be the same way. So traveling, learning this, learning that, he was just kind of pushing me the whole time. And right from the beginning, it was just kind of head first right into it. And, you didn't really have that period of, well, what do I do? It was like, this is what we're going to do. And been that way ever since, honestly. But,
Early on, did you ever have an opportunity where you could stand up and say member, or were you talking about being in the progressive line?
when I joined, of course, when I first joined, I had no idea what anything was. Once I had no intention of being this involved. I thought, well, I'll kind of find my niche, and I'll contribute in some way. Um, I became an officer. I thought, there's no way I'll be a master of the lodge. That's, but I'll be a steward. I'll just do this, which obviously leads to other things. And as the years have gone on, I never dreamt of just kind of continuing with it. Yeah, I never saw myself at this point.
It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? If I remembered who I could attribute this quote to, I would, right? But I've always been told that you don't grow when you're in your comfort zone, right? So the one thing leading to the next, like dipping your toe in and getting a little bit wet, and then going in up to the ankles, and so on and so forth. The next thing you know, you're swimming out to the buoy, right? That sounds very similar to the situation I found myself in too. So
I once I got involved, you know, I knew there were things I wanted to work on, and honestly, Freemasonry gave me an opportunity to do that. There were a lot of things I wasn't comfortable doing, but I kind of thought, well, when this is over, I'm going to be better because of it.
networking, public speaking,
Exactly.
Oh, 100%.
leadership.
Yeah. I mean, you know me, I've always been an introvert. Public speaking was not my forte, but now we get out into the lodge room and I think I do okay. So,
Yeah, it's very similar. Introvert, very much feel like I fake it till I make it, but it's the lodge and the responsibility to my brothers in those other chairs is one of those things that makes me stand up and do those things. It makes me kind of overcome that I say natural, and I mean that for me, but the kind of fear around that being the center of attention, the public speaking, etc.
And, I think Masonry is I won't say perfect, but kind of the perfect platform for doing that. I mean, how many places can you go where you can walk into a room, not know half the people there, but everybody there wants you to succeed. You you know everybody there is on your side. They want you to do your best. They want you to do a really good job, and if they can help you do it, they will. That's the perfect place to put yourself out there and challenge yourself, and do those things like public speaking, which nobody likes, um, and grow and get better. So that's how I've looked at it.
Yeah, and it's one of the main reasons that I love the Master Craftsman program as much as I do, because there's somebody there that is not only helping you but can tell you, I've I've been here, I've done that, right? I'm maybe only one or two steps ahead of you on this ladder, but I'm going to extend an arm down.
The master craftsman, I think, I don't want to say it's undervalued, but it's maybe underutilized.
We could do a better job of
hmm
formalizing it and kind of communicating it out there to the young guys, right? It does feel, at least locally here,
Yeah,
right? I'm not going to speak
100%.
for every lodge, but I do feel like it's more informal than it should be. And again, this is one man's opinion, but I think we could do a better job of formalizing that and getting a little bit more out of it.
So my master craftsman, um, if we were to meet outside of the lodge, we are extremely different. When I joined, um, that's a big part of why I got involved as much as I did when I joined. He and I would meet every week, and we'd work a little bit, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then it was an hour of just talking, having a good time. Had nothing to do with masonry. We'd go off on tangents and other subjects, and we just had fun. And so he was like that connection. You know what I mean? And that was 13 years ago. He's moved out of state. He moved away quite a few years ago. We still talk. He's coming back on Thanksgiving. He was at. We'll check in. How you doing? Where you at? What's going on? Yeah, it's that initial, that person like your link to start with, that can help you along. Things you don't know that you don't know, he can tell you. He can help you get comfortable and kind of ease into things. And um, he'd be the first to tell you, he was not an officer in the lodge. He had no idea how certain things worked. Yeah, I can't go into detail, but so he and I learned a lot of things together going through this process. And yeah, it was a good time. It's something that I think a lot of people don't get to experience, unfortunately, or don't have the opportunity to experience. So to your point, yeah, we need to probably do a better job in that area.
Yeah, I think that could be at a lodge level, right? I'm certainly not trying to cast any aspersions at anybody. I'm
Right,
talking about locally
Yeah,
here,
right,
100%.
matching personality to personality and just setting people up to succeed.
right.
Get those younger guys involved as soon as they're ready. I mean,
Exactly.
that's what I've tried to do this year is get those younger guys involved, especially with the younger guys because they relate well. Thinking a little bit too, about again your journey, and we talk about the 19th district. We talk about, we've talked about Worshipful Brother. We've talked about Brother. Talked about Right Worshipful Brother. What does that all mean? How does the district work? How does that fit into masonry here in Ohio?
So obviously we're all brothers, and that's the main thing. Once you've done certain things, a worshipful brother, as we all know, someone who's presided in the east of a lodge. A right worshipful brother is someone who has served as a district deputy. What was your other question?
Well,
How the districts
yeah,
work.
how does that work? Because again, like my dad in Indiana doesn't they don't have district deputies. They don't have that, setup. So when I was trying to describe that to him, it didn't make a lot of sense.
So in the state of Ohio, and don't quote me on the numbers, um, we have over 400 lodges, 420 something, I want to say. Um, so as far as an organization like Grand Lodge to be able to keep in contact, um, help, and manage all of that would just be impossible. And, doing so would take forever. So it's broken down into districts. Ohio has, I believe, 25 districts. And of course, we're the 19th. So at each district, you have an advisor, you have a certain number of deputies, and a certain number of DEOs. And so they kind of help in that regard. A lot of questions, a lot of things can be handled at the district level and never make it to Grand Lodge. So things happen quicker, easier. Um, yeah, it just obviously the grandmaster can't make it to 420 some inspections, 420 some installations. It's just impossible. And so a district deputy is the representative of the grandmaster. And so each deputy has a certain number of lodges assigned to him, and in those lodges, he is the representative for the grandmaster. So you just basically kind of picture, okay, the grandmaster's here in his place.
For those unfamiliar with the acronym, a DEO is a district education officer. One of the parallels that I try to draw with the new people, and please jump in where you disagree, is to state government. The Grand Lodge is kind of like the governor's office, the attorney general's office. The district deputies are similar to like your county level government, your sheriffs, etc. Whereas the local lodges are your municipalities, right? Like the seat here in Newark with the mayor, et cetera, et cetera. Not perfect, but something that most people who've taken a fifth grade civics class could probably understand.
Right. Yeah, and it's kind of forms. I don't want to say a chain of command because that's probably not the proper term, but there is a process, and like I said, most things can be handled at the district. It frees up the Grand Lodge. They're not so inundated with everything. And it's opportunities for people in each district, to take on those responsibilities and grow in that regard. So
Can you, regarding the district, so we also have Masonic bodies within the district that are separate from a district deputy grand master, for instance. So here in the 19th, we've got the 19th Masonic District Association, right? But you are not an officer of that body. You are separate from that. Can you untangle that a little bit for us?
yeah, so the district association is actually a whole separate entity. Um, in terms of administration and whatnot. You have the advisor, you have the deputies, you have the district education officer. Um, as a separate entity is the district association, and their purpose, for the most part, is to basically promote the welfare of the district. So when you look at encouraging people to travel, um, coming up with events to get people involved and active, getting families and friends involved, in our district, you know, we have our visitations, our picnics, things like that to just kind of generate some interest. Of course, I think every district association handles a grandmaster's reception and helps, with coordinating that. But it's actually two separate groups with the association and the deputies, the DEOs. Um, and I think some of the confusion, which is kind of a good thing, is that we typically work really well together. Um, the association, the deputies, the education officers. Oftentimes, I was a district officer at one time. A lot of people have been district officers. Not everybody moves on to other things. Some can't, because of time or whatever reason. So that might help or might lead to some of the confusion as well. As people kind of go from one to another. There's not necessarily a you know progression there. But yeah, there's a definite difference there. But
Are,
yeah, we all work together.
and work together well, I would add. Now, are there different means of entry, right? Like, for instance, is the district association by invitation only, whereas becoming a district deputy grandmaster is more of a you've met certain prerequisites with your lodge, or are they both invitation only?
Yeah, so they're both basically invitation. It's there's no like if you do these things, you become this. I was I've been told in the past over the years, there's always somebody watching. It's even when you're at a meeting doing something you think is just simple and mundane, that there's always somebody watching. Um, we elect a new, or it's not elected, appointed. Um, but there's a new deputy every year. There's a new education officer every year. There's a new third vice president of our district every year. So every year we're looking for new people. And so there's always kind of somebody looking for, okay, who's that next person? And you just kind of look around and, It might just be at a stated meeting, or um, obviously people that travel that are involved. I won't say those are prerequisites, but those are important things that people look at.
Well, in a merit-based system, if you were putting yourself out there and demonstrating merit, it stands to reason that you would receive more of an invitation than somebody who's not putting
Right.
themselves out there.
Absolutely.
So changing gears here, let's talk a little bit about the current state of Freemasonry, both here in the 19th district and in Ohio. How would you describe the current state of lodges? The ones under your care here in the 19th and just in the 19th district as a whole. Do you see good energy, participation, morale? Tell me a little bit about those.
It's of course it's an organization that's based around people, and so there's always going to be ups and downs, hills and valleys. So it's kind of all over the gamut. There's definitely energy and enthusiasm. Um, I see just in my 13 years, um, lodges that maybe were had some challenges, but are now doing really well. And so I think there's always that up and down, and so we're kind of seeing a little bit of both of that. But here lately, I'm kind of seeing a little more enthusiasm, I think. Obviously you guys here, I always talk about that, but some of the other ones, it's you hear, oh man, you just brought two more guys in. Okay, well, okay, now two more. Okay, there's so there's people wanting to get involved, wanting to do more, coming up with new ideas, new things. So yeah, I think it's good.
Do you think something's changed in the last couple of years that's kind of driving that energy?
I don't know what's changed. I don't know if it's something that is outside, like societal. If it's something we're doing, I mean, I like to think it's something we're doing, but I'm not real sure what's doing it.
Could it also be internally too, as like an organization? Has Freemasonry changed a little bit, or at least the way that they reach out to folks?
Yeah, there's obviously social media, which is can be good, can be bad. It just depends on how you use it. Modes of communication are different now, or slightly different. So that may lead to some of it. We use the internet in various ways now. Podcasts, for example. So I like to think that the message is getting out there a little more. And when there's energy or enthusiasm, that stuff's it spreads, right? It's contagious. So and an organization based on people, all it takes is one or two people. And I mean, that can change everything. And people see that. And if they see something's going well, they want to be a part of it, and it just attracts people. So, like I said, you get one or two people, kind of lights a spark. I mean, things can take off in no time.
Setting aside like personality differences, which, people bring different energies to conversations and rooms and everything else. But the lodges that you're seeing improve or do well, is there a through line there? Is there something that they're doing differently than the lodges that are maybe, God, I don't want to sound bad, but maybe stagnant, right?
I a lot of what I think attracts people is that we're not just having meetings, that we're doing other things. Some of the lodges that do well are the ones that are doing various fundraisers. They're traveling well. They're doing things that kind of bring them together, other than just sitting in a lodge room, listening to minutes and paying bills. They're out doing stuff and having those experiences. Maybe doing things that have nothing to do with Freemasonry at all. Um, Seems like that, kind of helps. And the lodges that are doing well seems like they're the ones that are active and they're doing things not just in the lodge but outside of the lodge.
Looking at it from 100 years from now, people are going to look back at COVID, right? Think of masonry in the maybe 2 or 3 years preceding COVID, through COVID to now, right? Do you think that what's happening right now is a slingshot effect where we're kind of returning to normal? Or do you think that we are doing better than 2018, 2019?
I think some of it might be a slingshot. I think, yeah, we went so far one way. It's like, okay, now I need to go back to, to this. Um, it affected everything for a while, and it certainly affected us for a while. And I think, yeah, I don't think we're necessarily better than we were before, but I think we're headed in that direction.
And when I say better, I just mean more enthusiasm, more being involved in the community, more social events with the brothers, etc. Right? Like I'm. That's not in any way a commentary on the brothers themselves, of
Right,
course.
right. I think we're also getting, while social media has its benefits, there's also negatives to it, and I think some people see that social media isn't very social, and I think there's people that kind of want that actual interaction with people. And we're a fraternity. It's based on activity and being with people and doing things. And I think people who maybe necessarily younger people who've kind of grown up not really having that, they kind of feel like, man, something's not right. I need something else, and they're kind of looking for that interaction with people. And obviously, we can certainly provide that.
That's a discussion that we've had many times here, right? Because we want to meet people where they are, and for better or worse, subject to one's opinion, people are engaged in social media, the doom scrolling and everything else. I very much agree with you, obviously, that there's that element that is missing, right, when it comes to just socialization. If you just live your life inside of the little 4-inch box, right, that is the screen, of course. But it almost feels like a necessary evil to me. And again, this is one man's opinion. It feels like a necessary evil to be able to connect with people and kind of spread that influence and get them interested.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not saying it's bad. It's like anything in life. Everything is in moderation, right? It's We can certainly abuse just about anything. There's pros, there's cons. It's just a matter of how we use things and utilize things.
One, and thinking about, younger men being attracted to Freemasonry, do we have that connection or have we lost that connection, in modern life and in modern society? Or is that still there? And, if it is, why? And if not, what's that missing ingredient?
I think people still want what we have, or what we have to offer. I think we can do a better job of making sure people know we're here and knowing what we have to offer. But I think it's still something people want. There have actually been surveys and studies done, with men across North America, and what do you feel is most important? They did this whole list of all these things that men find valuable in their lives, and I mean, we hit the mark on like all of them. The things that we say we do and we have to offer, that's what people are looking for. So it's just a matter of us making sure people know we're here and this is what we do, and then that we actually do them. Um, we're as relevant now as we've ever been, I think.
Yeah. And I would tend to agree with that. I think, we talk about brotherly love, relief, and truth. We're talking about compassion, service, and integrity, right? And I think those are things that, you know, not just young men, all men, I think, are looking for, nowadays. So somehow we're, that message that we have is just not getting there. How do we fix that?
I think we've made masonry too much of a secret. We don't talk about it enough. I think there's a misconception that we're a secret society when we're not. And obviously, if we were a secret society, you wouldn't have a podcast. There wouldn't be signs on the building. We wouldn't have websites and license plates and rings and hats. There's certain things we keep private, just like anybody does. Um, but some people kind of go too far, and maybe that's something we could educate on. Is there's not a lot that's a secret. We can talk about a lot of things. And I think we've just gone so many years of just not talking about it enough.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, we can talk about most things. Whenever I talk with my friends that aren't Masons, I'm always like, I can talk to you about like 99.9% of everything that we do and, and don't do in our lodges. And that 0.1% you could probably actually find online anyway. But yeah, no, I really, that resonates because I think that for too long we've been thought of as these cloistered secret societies with these secret rituals, and We know where all the gold is at. When we do these lodge tours, I get that all the time. People think that either this building is closed or that we're just these secret monks that hang out once or twice a month.
Have they asked about the gold?
I have not had anybody ask about the gold yet, but I keep telling them just go talk to Brian King.
So that tracks. Yeah.
It is what it is there. So, and as we think about that too, I think about, obviously I look at our membership statistics a lot, being the current master of the lodge. And, our numbers are declining, not just, here in Newark, but across the state, across the country, globally. How concerned should we be about that?
I think there's always concern. I don't think we want to get to a point where we're like freaking out because then you start to do things you don't necessarily want to do. I don't think we're at that point. My understanding, and I haven't looked at numbers, but my understanding is that all groups are kind of facing this. If you look at veterans organizations or Lions Club and all these groups, they're all facing declining numbers. Now, granted, we're a centuries old organization. We had a huge influx after World War II, right? So it stands to reason, things are going to kind of come back down a little bit. So, do we compare numbers to like our highest, our peak, or are we getting closer back to where we kind of were? And there's also the argument, there's obviously a larger population now too. So, I think there's cause for concern. I'm not as concerned about overall membership as I am about active membership. If, say, a lodge has 150 people, say, oh well, we used to have 170. Well, if you had 80 people sitting in your lodge room at a stated meeting, would you be worried about membership?
I know where you want to go.
Not to be contrarian about it though, but there is real estate involved. There's maintenance associated with the building. There's keeping the lights on, and dues are largely responsible for that, right? This is an organization that does charge people,
right?
Not a considerable amount of money, but to be members, right? That's not something that we should hide the ball on. I think there is a number of dues paying members at which we start to economically dip, right? That's just a reality. So while I am very big on active members as well, right? I also recognize there's the business side of it too, where we've got to at least stay flat.
So I think active membership addresses a lot of problems. The more people that are active, first of all, the more things you can do, the more options you have. It's the more people that are getting out and bringing in new members. So I think that gives you a lot of leeway and a lot of options and things you can do. Or it's a lot more people to have fundraisers. If it's financially, okay, now what are our options as far as going out having fundraisers, doing events, in terms of paying the bills, and all that. And you're right. I'm not saying, hey, but we're fine. We're down to 20. That's okay. But no, I think addressing the active membership first, kind of helps because okay, yeah, you can bring in a bunch of people, but are they going to show up? Because if our current members aren't here, is it the same reason that new members aren't going to be here? Is there something we're missing here? That let's solve this, and then okay, now let's jump to this. I don't know. There's multiple ways to look at it.
There's a lot of head shaking in this room because that was a very powerful answer, and I think it's the right one.
Yeah, 100%. I look at that. We talk about active membership. How do you engage more to get better activity with your membership? Get more response from the brethren, maybe the ones that have fallen off a little bit, or you're trying to re-engage them.
So I think it's kind of twofold. I think there's things that we're not doing we should be. Maybe we haven't kept up with the times in some areas. I think in some areas maybe we're not doing things we used to do that actually worked. I think we put a lot of emphasis on our meetings, but like a stated meeting, it's not all about business. I mean, it is, but that doesn't have to be all it's about. We can do a whole lot more.
To quote Worshipful brother Art Sterling, if you're not having fun, what's the point?
Exactly. If it's January and it's 20 degrees outside, what's going to get me off my nice warm couch and get me to go to lodge? So if our meetings, we're planning stuff out, it's efficient, it's run, we've got time to do all kinds of other things. And if it's planned out ahead of time, we can put it out there to the membership. Hey, next month we're doing this. These are all the things we're going to do, over the course of the next 2 or 3 months. Maybe people start showing up and saying, hey, I'm kind of interested in that. And it generates something.
I feel bad putting you on the spot. Are there any specific examples that you would feel comfortable talking about? The things that we're doing right versus the things that we could improve on?
I was going to say bingo nights, but
Well, as far as, and of course, I don't want to make it sound like it's all doom and gloom.
No,
yeah, absolutely.
It's certainly not.
G.I. Joe, right? Knowing is half the battle.
There you go. Things we can improve on. There's two that kind of hit right off the bat, I guess. One, our communication could be a whole lot better. When you look at our organization, the age range anywhere from, maybe 20 years old to someone in their mid 80s or more. There's a big gap in there. Some people just do not like to call. They're just uncomfortable calling people on the phone. There's some people that don't communicate any other way than if you call them, right? So it's our communication, being able to utilize social media, being able to email, text, but at the same time recognizing that doesn't reach everybody. We're missing a lot of people. If our average age is in the 60s, that means half our members are older than that, right? Now there's a lot of older people that are pretty tech savvy, quite better at it than I am. But by and large, there's a large group we're missing there in our communication. And obviously, you can't get involved if you don't know what's going on. So communication is one thing. And I think just in society, it's easy to get busy, and we're kind of in our own bubble, in our own world, and we don't do as good a job at maybe reaching out and checking on people and seeing if people need help. That guy that can't get out of the house maybe needs his gutters cleaned, going out and helping him. Those are the kinds of things that, that's another thing I think we can go back to doing a little bit better. I'm not saying we don't do it. I'm sure, there's tons of people that do this stuff. That's something we could probably get better at. In terms of what's working, this is generating, a lot of interest from the people I talk to. Um, anything we can do that's outside of the usual have a meeting, you know, doesn't even have to be Masonic at all. Just it gets people together, have a good time, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Oh, no, absolutely. And, I think about this too with, all of, maybe the lodges in the 19th or across the state of Ohio or just, across the country, maybe they're struggling or maybe they're not. What message would you have to those lodges to, whether it's, stay the course, what would you say to those lodges if you could say one thing or maybe a few things? What would you say to them to, really give them that pep talk, I guess?
Well, I mean, ultimately, first of all, they're doing great. I mean, they're plugging away, putting the time in. Like I said earlier, one or two people can change everything. So things can change in a heartbeat. You just keep doing what you're doing, and look for those new ideas. Look for those new things that we're creatures of habit, right? And I'm bad about it too. I kind of get in my comfort zone, and this is how I do things, and this is how I'm going to do it. But maybe I need to do something different. Maybe change it up, spice it up, whatever you want to call it. Think of something new. What can we do at our next meeting that's different? What events can we come up with that's different? And again, not being secretive, talk to people about it.
So having talked a little bit about, where we are currently, let's talk a little bit about the future of Masonry and where we go from here. What do lodges need to do better to create a more fulfilling Masonic experience? What does that mean, and how do we move beyond just coming to a stated meeting or coming to a degree once a month and doing more?
I think a lot of it comes down to the vision, the planning ahead, the looking ahead. Um, Again, we kind of get in a rut. This is our monthly meeting. This is what we do, and we're going to do this, 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 and this. Um, yes, we have to pay bills. Yes, we have to read this report. But let's do that. Let's get it done out of the way so we can get on to the things we want to do, whether that's educational programs or any kind of programs. And I think that varies from lodge to lodge. Every lodge is different. There's some things that apply to everybody, but what does your membership want? You know, you have a lodge that might have maybe a bunch of younger, newer people compared to a lodge that has a bunch of past masters. They're probably going to want different things. So knowing your members, knowing what they're interested in, what they want, get them involved maybe in those programs. Let them present them. Let them do them. Let them talk about what they're passionate about. And again, if this stuff's kind of thought out ahead of time, you can let people know what's going on and hopefully attract. But yeah, the business has to be done, but it can be done quickly, efficiently, and properly, um, which gives you time to do the things you want to do.
Some of the most rewarding work that we do as Masons is through philanthropic endeavors. And one of the things that I've noticed as a through line through some of the petitions that have come through this lodge recently is these younger gentlemen actually have an interest in philanthropy, right? They're not just people who are trying to join Fortune 500 companies and be really ambitious and climb that ladder. They're really looking to kind of insert themselves into their communities. Of the lodges that you kind of oversee, for lack of a better term, what are some of the ways that they're kind of getting out there and doing some good?
So I think of food pantries as being one. Yeah, one thing, and I think everybody's guilty of this to some extent. We're charitable, but we don't necessarily let people know that because it almost feels dirty. It feels like, I don't want anybody to know because then it feels like I'm not doing it for the right reasons.
Chasing accolades.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I'm not doing this because I want attention or I want you know. Um, but yeah, food pantries are one thing. Scholarships are, a pretty large thing. If it's just out cleaning the side of the road, things like that. A lot of the lodges are doing stuff for first responders, EMS, things like that. Just appreciation, dinners, things of that nature. Um,
Any sponsored youth organizations?
yeah. If it's DMLA, Rainbow, um, scouting, things of that nature. Um, and not just organizations, young individuals who are, maybe really involved in school, very active. We do scholarships in that regard as well. But yeah, I think we can do a better job of people knowing that. I was a prospect manager, and to your point, I would talk to people who were interested in masonry, and they would ask, well, what do you guys do? And then of course I'd ask them, you know, why are you interested? And yeah, it's like, well, I want to be involved in the community, and I want to give back, and I want to do this. And so the best thing we can do is give them good answers. This is what we do. We're involved in all these organizations. We give money to this, we give our time to this. Because you're right, that's what people are looking for, or I shouldn't say everybody, but it seems to be most people. That's what they're looking for is how can I give back?
Well, there's something fulfilling about it too, right? I mean, even I've told my children this. Like, there are times that you wake up on a Saturday and you don't want to do anything and you feel lazy, but that to-do list isn't going anywhere. And actually doing it, you've got a sense of self-respect afterwards, as silly as that sounds. So, getting out there, volunteering your time, whether or not it's in a food kitchen or, even just giving to some of those organizations, I think is a good way that we can, even silently, right? Maybe we're not chasing clout, even if we're just doing it, we can give back to that community. And I'm glad to see that the younger guys are interested in that.
Yeah, no, I think it's great to see our younger guys really, interested in that, because it is super important to our communities. As we've been doing these historical society tours, one of the things that I hear all the time is, "I didn't even know you guys were still active. I didn't know you guys still existed. I thought this building was just a bunch of businesses." So I think having folks, see that we are serving, we are part of our communities is super important. But I think that also brings me to actually my next question, which was, we talk about, our story, and we talk about some of the secrecy around what we've done. How do we actually better tell the story of who we are without compromising maybe just that itty bitty bit of secrecy that we do have?
Just being vocal about it, and being out in the community. Um, when you're doing things, people talk. They want to know. They ask questions, which obviously can lead to, well. So, for example, we had some lodge brothers go to a brother's house, and um, he couldn't rake his leaves, so they cleaned up his whole yard and everything. Um, all of his neighbors wanted to know who they were, why they were there, which led to a conversation. Um, I don't necessarily want to see 10-foot tall flashing neon signs on top of buildings. But as I said earlier, I drove past a lodge twice a day for 15 years and didn't know it was a lodge. Um, and it's an old building that sits like 12 feet off the street. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's ever,
That sounds pretty familiar, actually.
Yeah, I was just
yeah,
say it sounds familiar. I mean, I look at the windows here, and that's
yeah,
exactly where we're at.
and it ideally everybody should know that their town has a lodge and where it is. You know, no, none of us should be able to say, "Well, I didn't even know we had a lodge." Whether that's going out and doing stuff in the community, being involved with various local organizations, because those groups, that's what will make the biggest impact. It makes the biggest impact for us and for them because they're right here. We get to see that, um, and even other stuff we talk about. Parades used to be a big thing. Get involved in parades, just that visibility too.
Do you find that there are misconceptions about who we are or what we do that might, hurt us telling our story?
Well, there's the big one that people think we're a religion, that we're, yeah, we're our own religion, which we are not, of course, as we know. And then back to the it's a secret society. Um, that's been the two things I've noticed the most.
How do we combat that? I mean, again, obviously talking, to folks and just having those conversations, but how do we combat that?
It's interesting. It's interesting when you ask a Mason about Masonry. A lot of people clam up. They don't have like a really good answer, and so we just got to get better at talking about it,
Do you,
explaining it.
do you think that social media helps or hurts us telling that story, especially to a younger generation?
I think it helps. It can hurt, like anything, depending on how it's used. But you can obviously reach more people, which can be a good thing, could be a bad thing. But you, you can get it out there.
And I know he's talking about that one bad thing because of the prospect that you had that one day. But hey, it happens sometimes.
It was an interesting phone call.
It was an interesting phone call. Kind of bouncing off of that, how do we balance the timeless traditions of Freemasonry with, the need to innovate and adapt and, I don't want to say change to, meet the needs of a new generation, but for lack of a better term, change to meet the, needs of a new generation.
Well, I mean, we obviously have to stay relevant, right? And Freemasonry has always changed. We're not the same now that we were in the 1600s. We've adapted, we've changed along the way, whether it's technology or whatever. I, I don't think that changes our core values, our mission, what we're all about. How we go about doing things doesn't change that.
Have you seen examples of where that's been done successfully?
Well, we have online inquiries now. I mean, that's kind of a new thing. I don't think that changes who we are or anything like that.
That's interesting because again, I think of those technological leaps and how it hasn't been around for that long. It really hasn't. Do we face any risks with modernizing as well?
I think anything could be abused. I mean, there's always risk with everything. It just depends on how you use it.
To the extent that anybody asked me, I worry about the secrecy. And I say that only as Chris pointed out, 99.9% of this is not secret.
Mhm.
But that 0.1% that is kind of important. And I would draw a parallel with like looking for Christmas presents after Thanksgiving and basically ruining Christmas morning for yourself.
Right.
This is not, these are not earth shattering secrets. They're not, right? But they're important, and there's a presentation associated with them that is equally important. And that's why they're secret.
Like you said, you could find it out on the internet, but you also find a lot of stuff that's not true, and you don't know
Exactly.
one from the other.
Exactly.
I was a very influential person in our district once told me, all the secrets are out there. Everything's out there for everybody. I didn't swear that you wouldn't know. I just said I wouldn't tell you. So, that's what I'm holding to is, I'm not the one that's going to tell you this. And I almost hate to use the word secret.
Right.
It's almost just private.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say, Chris, how much money do you have in your banking account? And, I would expect you to tell me to go fly a kite.
Yeah, pretty much.
Doesn't mean you're laundering money or doing something nefarious or, illegal.
Yeah.
But it's none of my business, right? That's your matter. Those things that we do, we don't talk about. It's not because it's we're doing something wrong. That's our business. We just don't go out and tell everybody about it. And people are free to know what that is if you petition a lodge and everything works out. We're not hiding it at that point. But yeah, we don't broadcast everything. But like you said, there are a few things that we keep secret or private, I'll say.
But private's a good
I was
word.
going to say, I really like that word private because, again, it really distinguishes us from being a quote unquote secret society to just having stuff that we keep within ourselves.
And cards on the table, I mean, it's frankly a more apt term because there are truths that are universal, right? There are cultures, there are societies, there are other organizations, religious and otherwise, that share values in many ways with what we do as Masons, right? So it might not be the only path to that knowledge, but it is one. So it's not secret. It's private. I think that's a very good term.
Private, and again, I like that too when you mentioned talking about, really being a-religious. It's not a religious society. You could be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, you name it, you can be a part of who this is. And I think that's one of the other misconceptions that I hear a lot. Folks think it's more of a Judeo-Christian society, and it really isn't.
I always try to tell people that we do not offer a path to salvation. That's something that you'll find with most religions. And while we certainly do, kind of from the figurative pulpit, speak to morals and virtues, there's no path to salvation here, right?
Yeah, that because we're by and large made up of religious people.
Yes.
And for those who aren't Masons, you know, we are told, your religion comes first, whatever religion that may be. That comes first. Yeah, unfortunately, there are churches out there that forbid their members from being Masons or try to. And yeah, there is that misconception that no, this is a whole separate entity. We encourage you to follow your religion, but we don't tell you what that religion is. We don't. There's no Masonic Bible, so to speak, or it's there. Yeah, everything.
There is, but it's just the Bible.
Yeah, it's a regular Bible with a square and compass on it.
Right.
Yes. It's
or the Quran or the
That's
Torah.
true too.
Correct.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be any one of those.
The words that are in it are there's no Masonic scripture, so to speak. So
if you could give any advice to any Mason, new or seasoned, who really wants to make a difference in the fraternity, what would that advice be?
be there.
Hmm.
And I say that we're all strapped for time. Everybody does what they can. Everybody's at different stages in their life. Some have more time than others. But you do what you can. Be there. Um, make time when you can. Get involved when you can. Um, ask questions. Offer to do things. Again, put yourself out of that comfort zone. Learn something new. That's where it kind of all starts. We tell everybody, Masonry does not come before your family. It doesn't come before your job. It doesn't come before your faith. That doesn't mean it's at the bottom of the list. We can be a solid number 4, on the list of priorities. A lot of it's about time management. It's so easy to find a reason to say I can't. We can all find a reason to say I can't do that. It's a lot harder to say no. I can do that. I can make time. I can do this and that. Um, but you get nothing out of this if you don't show up. You get nothing out of it if you do nothing. So be there when you can. Get involved when you can. You'll get so much more out of it. Like I said, it's a perfect place to go to and just kind of put yourself out there, learn, grow, do new things.
Kind of piggybacking off that, what do you wish someone had told you when you joined?
I thought about that, and I honestly don't have a good answer. Because I was that guy when I joined. I was asking everybody everything. I jumped in. I wanted to know. I was asking people from other lodges stuff. I was traveling around, and I'm sure people were annoyed by me because I was talking too much. But I mean, yeah, there were little things along the way I didn't know, but for the most part, I mean, if I wondered, I asked, and people told me. There wasn't like this big, oh wow, man, I wish I'd have known that 2 years ago. But um, I can't think of anything honestly. I know that's terrible to say, but I just can't.
You basically drank right from the spigot, full blast.
Going full circle, that I think that's a sign of having some good master craftsmen around you.
Yeah.
Frankly.
I do too.
Like I said, that first, when we started, I said that guy that just kind of took me and shoved me in. I mean that initiation by fire, so to speak. You jump in and you do it, and yeah,
Did they make you comfortable, or are you kind of naturally an extrovert?
they made me comfortable. So I've told some people this story. I was the guy in school. If I had to do a report, like get up and talk in front of people, I just didn't do it. I'd take the F, the 0, the incomplete, whatever it was called. I was not going to get up in front of people and do anything. And I knew that was I'll say weakness of mine, and it's something I wanted to improve on. So I saw an opportunity, and I kind of think that's the other thing is we look at these things as challenges, and I try to look at them as opportunities. Everything's going to make us better somehow. So when I had the chance to get involved in lodge and do these things, um, I was worried about it. I was nervous about all these things, but I made myself do it, and I'm so glad I did. Um, I'm not going to say I've gotten perfect at anything, 'cause I certainly have not. But um, if you would have seen me when I was younger compared to now, I think you would see a big difference.
I like that the craftsmen around you kind of did that, and you had people to take you under your wing and give you that level of comfort to kind of take that leap of faith.
Yeah, it was encouraging. Like I said, we create the environment, right? Of we want people to work hard, do their best, but we also understand people are going to make mistakes. People are going to screw up. It's just part of life. And we encourage people and help them along the way. And yeah, I was very fortunate in that regard.
Thinking about, your entire journey through Freemasonry and everything you've experienced, if you could change one thing about Freemasonry today, what would it be and how would we get there?
If I knew how we'd get there, I'd be one of the most popular Masons in Ohio. I, um, I mean, I want the same thing I think everybody wants is, you want to walk into a lodge and see 50 people sitting there at a regular meeting, not an inspection or anything, just a regular meeting. Um, the more the merrier, right? Many hands make light work. The more people are there, it's more fun. Everything's better. So, I think everybody wants to walk in and just see a room full.
Yeah, I mean, I think about even just our last stated meeting where we had about 15 guys there, and
We're averaging that now.
yeah,
I've
we're
I've
averaging
seen
about
I've
15.
seen numbers of 17 and 18, which
Uh,
is nearly double what it was once upon a time.
yeah, and just the buzz that you felt in that room, I turned to our chaplain who was standing right next to me as we were getting ready to open, and we just stood there for a moment and took it in. And, I think that's exactly what you're talking about. The more people that are in there, there's a buzz, there's an energy, there's something very unique about that.
When you bang that gavel, it I that was the one thing that I loved is when there was enough cross chatter at some point that I had to bang the gavel because that meant something was going right.
Yeah.
Right? Like if it is funeral quiet, it's not the best sign.
Right.
But when you've got camaraderie and you've got social interaction and you've got people who want to be with each other and people who are aligned in values and they're rowing the boat in the same direction and everybody's excited to be there and you got to like calm them down to get something
Yeah.
done, that means something's going well.
Well, and for me, once we get into a meeting and there's good discussion about, maybe it's new business, old business, whatever it is, when you have two, three, four, or five guys standing up waiting to be called on to talk, I mean, that's exactly what you love. I mean, I lose track sometimes of who wants to talk next and who's next, but those discussions, they mean something because we're actually doing something in the room.
Mhm. Yep, not just going through a checklist and okay, we're done.
Yeah,
Kind of thing.
I mean, usually when I have new business, it's the shortest list ever, but that's always fun.
Yep.
I I've managed silence well lately.
Yeah, like I said, that's the one thing. But I think that's the one thing, not the one thing. But that's something everybody wants.
How do we get to fuller lodge rooms?
The experience. I mean, making those meetings something that's worth going to. And I'm not saying they're not, but I'm just saying putting that effort into is, in some places, the fellowship before or after isn't quite there. Maybe we're not having, the time, the food, just to getting together and talking and having a good time before or after. Again, we're all, everybody's busy. I got to hurry up and get back to this or that, and it's tough to juggle. Um, but having those events, those meetings where you go home and you think, "Wow, I'm glad I went." That was worth my time.
The social bonds, I think, really um, drive that. When you can look left and look right, and those brothers are people you care about, and you want to be there for them. You want to be there to get stuff done, and there's some level of accountability, right? Like if I don't go, I'm gonna miss this. If I don't go, I'm not gonna have this conversation. Like I think that matters. And then maybe this is just a me thing, but I think the ritual work does it too. I look forward to every special meeting that we have, just because I take something new away from those experiences virtually every time. And as we get better at those things, and people have different inflections, and or you have different people doing different things, you just hear things different. And I always like that little bit of dopamine hit that I get from that something new, right? So I think the ritual work is as a driving factor as well. I don't know if that's something you're hearing in the other lodges or not, but
So I guess kind of a side thing, that the first inspection I was a part of, I was a junior deacon, and we had all first time officers. Everybody was new. There was no past masters at all. And I was doing the lecture. I When I agreed to do it, I didn't know what it was, and then I found out. I was kind of mad at myself, but I agreed to do it. And I worried about this thing for months. Um, I played sports a little bit when I was younger, but not a lot. And that group of officers that we had, very energetic, very detail oriented. They worked hard. They wanted to do a really good job, and so we had this inspection. And I got up, I did my part, and I sat, and it was the best feeling when I sat down, because everybody did their part, everybody nailed it, and we sat down. And I thought, man, that was good, you know. And you don't need a deputy or anybody else to tell you, you did a good job. You know it. You sat down. I'm like, yeah,
You might feel like you need to wring your shirt out under your jacket,
yeah,
but you know when you
oh
did.
yeah,
You know when you nailed it.
yep.
Yep.
And it's a great that was worth the months of worrying and stressing out about this or that or something else. And the I was a junior deacon. I remember, I can't talk too much. There's a part where I handed somebody off to somebody else, and I didn't realize it. But afterwards, he said, "You realize when you did that, you had the biggest smile on your face." I was like, "Yeah, I was probably relieved,
Right.
but no, it was it was a great feeling, and I think if we shy away from those challenges, we don't get those rewards afterwards. So
I mean, I can remember the first inspection I was a part of. I believe you were sick, if I'm not mistaken. Was that the one?
Was it when I was in the East?
Yeah,
Oh, I was a wreck. Yeah.
it was. Yeah, that would have been, I guess, my second one. But yeah, that was nothing more fulfilling than seeing us succeed and seeing you succeed too. Being under the weather.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I will spare the listeners that story. I was on every over-the-counter drug known to man so that I could be there. But we did the job and did it admirably.
Yeah. Anything else that you have for us this evening? I mean, I think we've gained a lot of wisdom, but or anything, knowing that this episode's probably going to air after Grand Lodge, anything, from Grand Lodge that's going to be important, or
I got a curveball for you at the end too.
uh-oh.
you gonna hold out, or you're gonna give it to me now?
Which would you prefer?
Hold out, answer my question
Oh,
first.
okay. No, I mean, things are getting ready to get busy. Got Grand Lodge next week, which is always a good time. I mean, we talk about having a full lodge room. Maybe it's even 15. We talked about. Now go into a room with hundreds of Masons in it. It's just that whole showing up at the hotel, and you're looking around, just everybody, got the badges and the pins, and you just know. You're in a room full of good people. So that's always a good time. But yeah, things are going to get busy. Got a few months, got inspection season starting up, and um, this this should be, if appointed for this third year, um, this would be my last year. So going into that.
Would you be comfortable discussing what an inspection is? Not necessarily the ins and outs of it, but its purpose.
So basically, a lodge has to demonstrate to the Grand Lodge of Ohio that it's doing what it needs to do, and it's doing it properly. And again, the Grand Master can't be there to every lodge. So yeah, a deputy goes in, and some of it's administrative, some of it's ritual, and you basically demonstrate that yes, we can do what we said we would do, and we can do it proficiently.
There's enough knowledge in the room. There's enough capability in an independent lodge room to properly govern a lodge.
Yes, properly govern the lodge. Um, you know, I's are being dotted, T's are being crossed. If
All the money's accounted for.
money's accounted for, or on the other hand, if candidates are coming through, are they getting a good experience? Is everybody getting the same experience? If I go to Cleveland, or if I go to Cincinnati, or if I come to Newark, Ohio, is that guy going to get the same thing? Or is it going to be like way different? Something like not even close. So, as Masons, we agree to do certain things a certain way. And we're just demonstrating that our lodges are doing that.
Going back to the analogy I used earlier about state versus county versus city government, it's similar to a state constitution. So the Grand Lodge has its code, and we're all governed by it, and hence why there needs to be uniformity between the extreme southwest and the extreme northeast and everything in between.
Right. Everybody should get a good experience and should get that experience. We are governed by the Grand Lodge of Ohio, and when a lodge receives its charter, that's the agreement. We're going to do these things this way, and part of that agreement is okay, and just demonstrate it once a year. And so, your deputy is the representative that comes in and says, "Yep, all's good. Everything in Newark's great. The secretary's doing a great job. Treasurer's doing a great job. The officers are doing good. These are the things they do throughout the year." And it also paints a picture for the Grand Master, too. When the Grand Line officers read those reports, they get a picture of Newark 97 or this lodge over here, that lodge, because they can't be there. So.
All right. Curveball.
Okay.
This one's for the Masons.
Okay.
I promise I will not ask you why.
Okay.
Masonic rings. Points in or points out?
Points in.
Okay.
Ooh. All right.
And for those listeners who do not know what I'm talking about, you are welcome to come down to a lodge and have a conversation with one of our brothers.
And maybe we'll have a conversation about that at another time in the future as well.
Yeah.
Could be a potential discussion topic.
I like it.
I do too.
Am I in the minority here, or what do you? Or do you not want to say?
I have strong arguments for both and will alternate.
I usually go points out.
And I think I've heard, or I think I know what both your arguments are, and they're good. I get it. I think my initial, that's how I was told, like in the beginning, and I just kind of stuck with that. And then afterwards, somebody's like, "Yeah, but."
I'll say this. I am naturally an introvert, and I am often introspective. And I'll let you do with that what you will.
Yeah. Then I know what you're in. Yeah.
Well, again, Right Worshipful Brother King, thank you so much for taking some time to sit down with us. We really appreciate your insights and your passion for the craft.
No, I appreciate it. I do have to question your decision making. Your first, your last episode, you had Worshipful Brother Sterling on here, which was great. But then you took a nosedive and had me on here. So I'm just saying, you might want to reconsider and think it through a little better. No, this is fun. You guys are doing a great job.
Again, I'd really like to thank Right Worshipful Brother King for giving us some of his time to come down here and really talk about where we are in the 19th District, where we are in Ohio, and kind of the future of Freemasonry, in general.
Yeah, it was a bit of a roller coaster conversation, right? There were some ups and there were some downs because we were talking about basically being real about current state versus where we want to be. But I do think the future is bright, and I think that's kind of what we walked away with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the future of Freemasonry is bright. We do have what the younger generation is looking for. It's really about how do we get that message out there, and hopefully what we're doing right here is getting a little bit of that message out to that younger generation and showing that we're not a bunch of, scary old guys. We're just regular guys sitting here having a conversation about a topic that we really like.
And one that serves us in both life and in our primary occupations.
Absolutely. So again, thank you to Right Worshipful Brother King. We truly appreciate his time. But this is going to do it for us here at Beyond the Door. We really hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to connecting with you each and every month. Please help us grow our audience by subscribing to us on your podcatcher of choice, as well as sharing this podcast with your brothers, friends, and family. Did you enjoy this episode? Please leave us your feedback on your podcatcher of choice. Remember, good reviews only. We want to hear all the good stuff, right?
I don't. Beat me up in the comments section. I don't care.
If you want to get in touch with us, Newark 97 is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also reach us via email at newark.97.lodge@gmail.com. Until next time, stay safe, and as always, search for light in Masonry.